and thanks for the invite to talk. Okay. Okay, I'm going to talk a little bit about project delivery from our experience working with a number of our council clients. I'll talk briefly about the scale of the problem, regulatory drivers. I won't linger on that because I think Zach's done a cracking job of that. What do we need to do and when? And then I'll focus on best practice project delivery and some steps that we recommend, and some of the lessons learnt on projects that we've worked on in the last few years. So the scale of the problem, I think 1.2 from New South Wales. There's a lot of numbers about, but Australia-wide, I think 2.5 million tonnes of food waste per year. 3%, I think, as Mike mentioned, of Australia's annual greenhouse emissions. It's a substantial number from food waste itself. And the benefits, as we know, we've heard about reduced greenhouse gas emissions, improved soil health and structure by getting those clean organics back into the soil, and reduce landfill costs from an economic perspective. Key drivers, we've heard about the mandates. We've got the WASM, we've got the National Waste Policy Action Plan as well, driving behaviour towards recovery of organics. I'll skip over that actually. I think we talked about, probably relevant actually to just talk about the 2030 timescale. Obviously businesses from 2026 to 2030, depending on how much waste has been produced by businesses. But the 2030 is going to be difficult to reach for some councils and some businesses. If a rigorous process is followed in order to get to that point, and depending on how that service is procured. Key considerations for FOGO project development. Project life cycle in terms of delivery of a project from concept to commissioning of a facility is really what I'm talking about. Can be complex and lengthy. Timing challenge, again, back to that 2030 timescale, anything from 2 to 6 years, depending on the scale of the project, in-vessel composting or windrow composting, depending on which way, which solution is chosen. Funding and procurement, engagement with the market, with contractors, with technology providers is absolutely crucial. And of course, for many councils, there's significant political considerations, the impact on ratepayers, time to absorb costs, ramp up costs. These are all considerations. It's a bit delicate, this, isn't it? Got to be very careful. So project life cycle, as I said before, this is in the context of project delivery, councils, larger councils that might be looking to build a facility, go to market, 20,000 tonnes plus is probably more about the context of what I'm talking about here. But we're working with a number of different councils, ACT Government, Central Coast Council, and we're all on the journey with a lot of these councils. So we've gone through these steps with our clients, and there's a few learnings that I wanted to share. So I'll talk to these individually, but we generally go through a project direction phase, which is very high level, which serves to review technology at a very high level, set the business case, set us up for the business case, and then get progressively more detailed as we go along, moving into technical financial feasibility, and then into business case, where really the project parameters are set. Tender development and evaluation, next into planning and approvals, and then through design and build and implementation and commissioning. Okay, so as I said, context. This is a structured project delivery very much evidence-based, appropriate for larger councils, government agencies, typically for public-private partnership type approach. In-vessel composting or similar, 20,000 tonnes per annum. There are some risks, I think, which Aaron pointed to in this space that need to be considered as well, that are emerging. So the environment, the risk environment is also changing. So the first phase, that project review and direction, is really the critical scene setting stage. We're looking at technology, we're looking at what technology not to use for the type of feedstock that we're going to expect from that particular project. It establishes the project parameters with the stakeholders and the decision makers of our clients, the councils, the why of the project, the technology type, the scale, the amount of material, the what really of the project, and how we're going to deliver it. So what type of delivery model is appropriate for that particular client. We'd look at the impact on residents very early on, and having this early stage allows for planning for curbside collection, to consider things like the weekly collection frequency. It talks at a very high level about education and the needs for education, and we put that very, very high on the consideration early on. And we think it's important to have an executive sponsor. These projects can go on for many, many years. There's a lot of money involved. There's a lot of stakeholders. And the project needs to be laid out for councillors, for executives along the process. So important to have that consistency of messaging and someone who's taking that project forward. Got a problem with the clicker. It was moving? Sorry. Okay, so the technical and financial feasibility, really building on that direction phase. It needs to be robust and informed. There's a lot of thinking time and a lot of discussion about choice of technology and the site selection, etc., etc. We'll be looking at additional design development at this stage. There might be some geotechnical studies that need to be done. There might be some logistics. But really to fill the gaps, the unknowns, so that we can get to a much more accurate CapEx and OpEx figure, which then leads into the business case. Engagement with procurement departments, really crucial. This is not something that councils do every day, and important to have a discussion with them about methods of delivery. At this stage, we'd be considering different methods of delivery of procurement as well, and to have an open discussion about that with our councils is really crucial. Sizing's fundamental. We'd be looking at more detailed analysis of feedstock. We'd be looking at forecasts. And that drives, obviously, the size of the facility. And we need to have a really good overview of population growth, etc., in the particular area. Internal engagement with council staff on education. As I said before, we recommend that very early in the process. Business case development. The project's really been set in terms of the technology and the location, the site, but we're trying to lock down CapEx and OpEx in a much more detailed manner. Crucial to align with the requirements, for example, of New South Wales Treasury, particularly if funding's required further down the track. But following that methodology, it's quite a detailed process. There needs to be qualified practitioners to put that business case together to make sure you're future-proofed. It needs to be comprehensive. We're talking about an 80 to 100-page document potentially for a business case if you follow New South Wales Treasury guidelines. And the risk process, having a look at project risks, putting the right risk allocation into the business case is crucial. And it's a good conversation to have for all of the stakeholders. Through to tender development and evaluation, Arup would normally get involved in writing technical specifications, helping with the setting of KPIs. We'd look at Australian standards, codes of practice, safety standards, those key requirements for tenders. And Aaron mentioned this before, the contracts really need to represent the realities of dealing with a complex organic stream. There's a limit to what processors can do in an organics processing plant for pre-treatment at the front end. And once you get plastics and other materials in a tunnel, for example, and it sits there at 60 degrees or 55 degrees for a couple of weeks, and then it sits in a maturation pile, you do get leaching of chemicals and other materials into the compost itself. So very difficult once it's gone in to get it out. So 2% has been talked about by many. 2% even is a lot when you look at it visually. In terms of the density is obviously very low. So by mass, it's you end up with a large amount of material. So it's a hot topic in the industry. Equitable risk sharing, that's difficult to say, between the proponent and the contractor. You can't really divest the risk to the processor or to the contract. You expect some expertise to be able to process the material, but ultimately the cost has to be borne somewhere. And that covers, all the way through from processing the material, quality material, and the markets for that material. And the benefit of that material really in a circular economy, from a circular economy perspective. You need to have a focus list of market participants. There's, it's a relatively immature field, market. In terms of delivery partners, there's a number of players, but it is a relatively small sector here, and it's, we're just starting really the journey in terms of large-scale FOGO processing, for example. There is a bit of market fatigue out there. We've done a lot of work with councils on stakeholder engagement, talking to processors, talking to technology providers. So important to do that well and do that comprehensively. Planning and approvals, of course, state significant development in many of these cases. It is quite complex and it's quite lengthy. As many of you will know how long it takes to get through planning for a facility that processes waste. It's fraught with difficulty. But we would suggest early engagement with DeFi and EPA is really crucial, both from a perspective of them understanding your proposal, but also with regards funding further down the track if that's an opportunity. Quality of the scoping report, which is put together to get SEERs, really crucial. The more detail to DeFi, the better, because otherwise you'll end up with a series of SEERs requirements which might be not relevant to the project. So that needs to be thought through carefully. Community awareness during the planning and approval stage, an openness to consult, comprehensive consultation with local stakeholders. Need to confront that stake head on. And commonly, having a dedicated resource for that is really helpful. During the design and build phase, often there's an owner's engineer that sits alongside the client, offers PM support, can bring operational experience to help in the design process. The more heads around the table really when you're developing the design, the better from our perspective. Independent verification that it works, and also it can support decision making at the executive level when you're talking about project delivery. So having that input from a technical perspective is often very useful. And then finally, implementation and commissioning. You know, when these facilities get up and running, and we've just been working with Dulverton Waste Management in Tasmania, and helping them through the commissioning phase as an owner's engineer. You know, it's a living thing, right? So that you think you have a plan for how it's going to go, but it needs tweaking, it needs management. There's a bit of problem solving as well when you kick off. So an in-depth understanding of the process is crucial. Many commissioning plans to put together. There can be 20-odd commissioning plans, I think, for Dulverton that we help them with, but quite a task. Just a quick, this is an interesting project that we did with Dulverton, actually. You know, the use of science and some more cutting edge engineering, I guess. We got asked by Matt at Dulverton to do some computational fluid dynamic modelling. I didn't know we could do it, but apparently we could. Really wanted to know how the odour was going to be managed within the facility. So we put our clever people to put a model together. And this really just shows the movement of air around the facility in the reception hall. And he had some concerns that one of the vents might be in the wrong position. We did the modelling, and we found that indeed that was the case, and just moving that vent by 1 or 2 meters solved the problem effectively and ended up with a far better airflow around the reception hall. So it was a really good outcome and an example of using science, using some quite sophisticated techniques to help in the management of that particular problem. The designer was quite happy. You know, it was a small move of event, and everybody understood the process a lot better by the end of it. But it also allowed for stakeholders in the project to understand what the issue was and why things needed to be changed. A really interesting project, actually, that we did there. So summary: complex delivery can take a long time. Engage with the stakeholders early. Don't underestimate the time that's needed for that. Some rigor in the process really helps any rework down the track. Funding requirements I talked about, and an understanding of the facility operation and how that works. So thank you very much.